Mic check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that with the lav or with the?
That's with the lobber.
Okay.
It's just on a different.
Set up over there.
No, you need someone to step up.
As long as we have Kyle's mic up there, we can see when we get trash off there. all their worm possessions in one trash can.
That's where it's at, yeah.
Living on them.
Yes.
Mom, that's just 4 hours. And we have BJ has his
How old is it?
Jimmy was 6 at the time, Jimmy was 6 at the time, BJ was 4. Yes, Alexis.
So he,
Zach, 17.
you have something you wanna tell us? See, I'm old enough.
So the closest kid I had was like these ones. No, that was crazy. But anyway. Which is new. 18 months later, years so short. They're going to terminate with the marriage clause, so now they go from their passion to choice. Otherwise, they put their faces on it. Or I could say anything. Currently in New York, not taking these two. 6 months later, we were in the election work.
Mic check, 1, 2, 3, mic check, 1, 2, 3, mic check. Mic check, 1, 2, 3, mic check. Mic check.
Finally, I said, I'm behind next to her. He said, well, what are you doing? I'm scared. I'm scared. Well, that makes sense. Scared of the building. Chicken breast, bigger than this one. Shape. 6 years old.
Well, and she's been working the train. She was probably the one in charge compared to before.
Well, she took care of her little brother.
Yeah, so,
And, I mean, she was really used to walking in the first one. And so I told her, I said, can you let me do that? Stash food in his bed, just in case. I didn't know if you were just over. And so I got a big basket, like a basket that filled with son's little bags of chips, fruit, and a mixture of junk food and stuff. That's what we chose. This is your son.
how's it now?
It's right there with you. First couple of nights, it was very nice. When he'd go, and he'd get up the next morning, or he'd just sleep in his bed. He was slumber. It's like, but really cute. They dance really well. Some taste of juice.
Hello, hello. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Baker, can you hear me over there? Hello, 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 hello. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello, hello. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay.
Hey, what's up?
Yes, I do. sorry for making everyone wait. We had just a little AV snafu. We think it's all clear. Auditors on the way over. Thank you for your patience.
First, let me apologize for being late. If you know me, I do not keep people waiting. But good afternoon, and thank you for coming. In July of 2022, Governor Stitt asked me to conduct a special audit of Tulsa Public Schools. Tulsa Public Schools is one of Oklahoma's largest school districts. It has an enrollment of 33,000 students in 78 different schools and employs more than 5,000 people. The vast majority of these employees are hardworking teachers dedicated to the success of their students. This audit report is not in any way a reflection of the quality of work. This audit is a financial review. The catalyst for this audit request was the case of Devin Fletcher. Devin Fletcher, Chief Talent Management and Equity Officer at TPS, was one of 33 administrators brought on board to help implement Superintendent Gist's 5-year strategic plan called Destination Excellence. Fletcher resigned in 2022, and he later pled guilty to wire fraud in the amount of $603,000. He was sentenced to 30 months in prison. Following this, Governor Stitt submitted the formal request for an audit. The governor asked my staff to investigate 3 different concerns: irregularities tied to vendor contracts and potential mishandling of public funds, questions regarding the district's use of elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, better known as ESSER funds, and possible violations of House Bill 1775 and the associated administrative rules. We structured our investigation according to the governor's concerns, focusing broadly on TPS's compliance with Oklahoma statutes, rules, and policies. We also conducted a thorough review of the district's internal purchasing controls. Now, I want to be very clear. This was an audit of a small group of TPS administrators. Our investigation was not focused on teachers' conduct, curriculum, or behavioral standards applied in Tulsa classrooms. As state auditor, I focused on the expenditures, the internal controls, and the oversight of those expenditures, specifically administrative compliance with state law and district policy. As we began to test samples of TPS purchases, it soon became clear that Fletcher's misconduct was a result of a much larger problem. Worried about the possibility of additional malfeasance, we had no choice but to expand our test work sample. The more violations of statute and policy we found, the larger the sample became. Our team reviewed more than 1,400 financial discrepancies. So before I can explain our findings, I want to emphasize 2 key points. First, even before Fletcher began his activities in 2018, multiple district administrators created and fostered a culture of financial noncompliance. Certain district leaders routinely disregarded laws and policies designed to protect taxpayer money. We discovered that TPS consistently failed to properly verify and document the receipt of vendor services. A systemic lack of internal controls existed at TPS, which enabled mismanagement and potentially placed millions of additional tax dollars in jeopardy. Second, noncompliance flourished due to the administration's lack of transparency with the school board and with the public. Ultimately, the board shares responsibility for financial management of the district. However, Gist's team took measures to hide information, including evidence about unauthorized expenditures from board members. At times, TPS administrators found ways to cut the school board out of the purchasing process entirely. Had board members acted with more diligence, exercising their fiduciary responsibilities to taxpayers, they would have been in a much better position to prevent Fletcher's malfeasance and to provide the oversight that state law requires. The audit findings can be organized into 10 overarching categories, which you can see on the screen. Any dollar wasted in education is cheating a child out of a needed resource, and we have to find a way to make sure that the money we allocate to schools get to the teachers and the students who need it. I'm going to spend the rest of our time showing you the documentation backing up our findings. Oklahomans have the right to expect public school leaders to be trustworthy stewards of their children and their taxpayer money. So let's begin with the expenditures. The State Auditor's Office conducted a thorough review of $37.7 million in expenditures, which span from school year 2015 to school year 2023. Of that amount, $29 million was paid to consultants. We examined 900 invoices received from 90 vendors, and we found over 1,400 financial discrepancies. We found compliance violations at every step in the procurement and purchasing process. We will begin with the vendor selection. Oklahoma law mandates that the Board of Education prescribe and administer business procedures and controls for district purchases. In compliance with this law, Tulsa School Board created Policy 5202, which requires the district to issue a request for proposal, or an RFP, for any purchase greater than $50,000. The policy also requires the school board to consider at least 3 bids from competing vendors before offering a contract. This policy holds school districts accountable for large purchases. Of the $37 million we tested, $25 million was spent in violation of the district's RFP and competitive bidding policy. For example, TPS vendor, the Achievement Network, received more than $782,000 from TPS without submitting a bid. TPS disregarded the RFP requirement because the expenditure was later reimbursed with donor funds via the Foundation for Tulsa Schools. The Foundation for Tulsa Schools is a nonprofit entity created for the purpose of supporting the operations of Tulsa Public Schools. TPS administrators routinely use the foundation to reimburse expenditures for vendors circumventing competitive bidding. TPS initially paid the Achievement Network with taxpayer dollars. Now, even if expenditure is subject to donor reimbursement, the board's policy has to be followed. Another concerning issue discovered by our auditors involved 19 vendors that received payments just below the $50,000 RFP threshold. Here are just a few of those checks. In our experience, when a government entity issues repeated payments within a few $100s of the threshold, it gives the appearance of an intentional attempt to bypass policy and undermine board oversight. We also found problems with the encumbering of purchase orders. Encumbering is the setting aside of funds for a designated purpose. Oklahoma law requires that every district payment be preceded by a matching purchase order approved by the board. When followed, this step in the procurement process ensures that the board has a chance to review the budgeted expenses before TPS issues any checks. Yet we found multiple examples of unencumbered funds and improper use of change orders totaling more than $860,000. For instance, an interior design consultant working for the TPS bond department received more than $421,000. Because the proper change order process was not followed, TPS paid this vendor an additional $243,000 without full transparency to the school board. Another example, TPS backdated financial records including purchase orders, as well as change orders to allow payments to a vendor owned by a former TPS employee. As you can see on the slides beside me, we found similar violations of state law with additional vendors. Now keep in mind, there was a system in place to notify TPS employees of irregularities between payments and purchase orders. As you can see, they must acknowledge that these payments appear to be a violation of state law. It is evident that top administrators understood that these payments were not allowable. This brings us to the final steps of the procurement process, invoicing and payment. Oklahoma law says that no payments can be made without an itemized invoice, as well as proof of receipt of goods or services. TPS's disregard for this statute was perhaps the most pervasive issue uncovered during our investigation. If administrators had demanded itemized invoices, it would have been more difficult for Fletcher to perpetrate his scheme against the district. Of the 900 invoices we examined, more than 300 of them lacked proper itemization. Altogether, we found that TPS made more than 700 payments to vendors without ever receiving documentation needed to prove receipt of services. We also found that many TPS vendors issued invoices based on budgets outlined in their contracts, not actual cost. So let's look at some examples which will illustrate the issues that budget-based invoices pose to taxpayer dollars. This image is taken from a TPS contract with another vendor. The invoices were not based on the actual services rendered. Instead of describing the services or the vendor's work product, the invoices simply refer to the contract agreement as the justification for the amount billed. It is impossible for taxpayers to know what services were actually provided month to month. We simply can't determine whether this vendor fulfilled its obligations to the district. Another vendor, ERS, also submitted budget-based invoices. $520,000 was budgeted for redesigning the school improvement planning process. These invoices provide no information. There's no description of services and no proof of work product. Once again, the vendor simply relies upon the contract's budget to justify the amount billed. This is an inadequate description of the vendor's scope of work or intended work product. It's difficult to hold vendors accountable when contract language is vague. Unfortunately, this contract is not unique. Part of the problem is that many contracts were not properly reviewed. Another vendor was hired without following the RFP process. Their invoices were also budget-based and lacked the required supporting documentation for the amount billed. The same can be said for the vendor, West Ed, who received a total of $1.6 million. Another vendor, the New Teacher Project, was paid more than $8 million by TPS without supporting documentation for their invoices. Another vendor, the Leadership Consultancy, was also paid without itemized invoices. In fact, our auditors could not determine if any employees at TPS actually received services from the vendor. To satisfy our auditors' request for evidence validating the hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments to the vendors, the TPS Communications Director reached out to the Leadership Consultancy asking for documentation of past work. In response to the company's CEO provided a presentation explaining she had received over $848,000 to provide professional coaching to 79 district employees. That means she was paid $10,740 per employee. It is concerning that $848,000 could be paid to a vendor without any documentation of services on file with the district. TPS also advanced lump sum payments to certain vendors, including the consulting firm, Turnaround for Children. In this vendor's contract, the district agreed to pay 50% up front, that is within 30 days of the contract's date. Similarly, Columbia University's Center for Public Research and Leadership received $25,000 in upfront payments. Likewise, Candor Consulting received payments before it had rendered the services described on its invoices. We also believe that Devin Fletcher altered or issued fake invoices similar to those used in his scheme. For instance, a summer intern was hired in 2021. He was paid $13,000 for 5 weeks of employment, around 30 workdays. He was also providing housing, which cost $2,100 and was covered by the foundation. There is no evidence that the intern's work was utilized by the district. The intern's invoice was in the same format as the fake invoices associated with Fletcher's scheme. The same is true for a $20,000 invoice for a former TPS employee. There's no evidence that she provided any meaningful work to the district. Ultimately, the systemic lack of internal controls at TPS opened the door to misappropriation of funds. Fletcher pled guilty to wire fraud in October of 2023, totaling $603,000. Our audit discovered an additional amount of $221,503 of misappropriated funds. This total included $494,503 from TPS and another $303,000 from the foundation. The district's initial concerns were centered on one vendor, but we discovered that Fletcher had engaged in wrongful activities with at least 5 consultants. Snickelbox was a company owned by one of Fletcher's acquaintances, hired as a consultant by Fletcher. They attended a fellowship class at the Broad Center, a nonprofit operating out of the Yale School of Management. Through TPS and the foundation, Snickelbox was paid over $870,000, with $329,000 being misappropriated. Like many of the vendors we previously described, Snickelbox invoices were not itemized, and its consulting agreement lacked sufficient detail about the work product it was expected to deliver. The vague nature of Snickelbox invoices, statements of work, and contracts enabled Fletcher to manipulate them without detection. Snickelbox was placed on a monthly retainer, and its annual contract amounts grew steadily from $30,000 in 2018 to $300,000 in 2022. Fletcher was able to fraudulently inflate the amounts billed by Snickelbox, creating false invoices. At least 4 other TPS administrators approved these invoices or payments. Fletcher used these misappropriated funds to reward TPS employees, mostly members of his own talent management development or department. He dispersed $4,000 in gift cards to 22 employees. Similarly, Snickelbox directly paid $42,000 to 5 TPS employees. These gifts are not allowed under TPS policy 4409. Fletcher also fabricated invoices for his half-sister, Shaniqua Monet Kemp, whom he hired under the pretense of providing consulting services. Kemp received $448,125. We found no evidence that she rendered services to the district. Kemp received more than $143,000 before anyone questioned her invoices. It wasn't until Kemp submitted a proposal for $200,000 in school year 2020 that an employee brought up the RFP and the bidding requirements. These red flags were disregarded by the then Deputy CFO, who waived the competition requirements and approved the payments to Kemp. Fletcher also falsified invoices for KAG Capital, who received $21,000 in payments. Like Ms. Kemp, there's no evidence that KAG rendered services to the district. We reported these transactions to the proper authorities, and KAG has since repaid the full amount to the district. Isaac Domingue was also an acquaintance of Fletcher and was hired to analyze employee data relevant to the COVID-19 vaccine. There is no evidence that Domingue produced any work for the $41,400 that he received from TPS. Fletcher altered Domingue's invoices, inflating the amount due, leading to $17,100 in questionable payments. Fletcher also submitted false invoices for another former coworker who was an associate of Fletcher's at his previous employer, Denver Public Schools. This vendor submitted an invoice for 3 hours of consulting work to TPS. Fletcher added 100 hours to the invoice, resulting in an overpayment of $9,000. Many of Fletcher's activities were perpetrated against the foundation, the nonprofit dedicated to TPS students. TPS employees, including Fletcher, often leveraged the foundation to limit transparency with the board and the public. The foundation's purchases are limited by statute to the operation of the school district. Most of the nonprofit's purchases were issued as reimbursements to TPS, and these reimbursements totaled $57.2 million from 2015 to 2023. However, when the district needed to make certain purchases, public funds could not be used. They often asked the foundation to pay for these costs directly. TPS administrators refer to this method as direct pay, and direct payments accounted for $5.1 million of foundation expenditures from 2015 to 2023. The foundation acknowledged direct payments were an issue after Fletcher's activities came to light. Their new director acknowledged that the foundation oftentimes serves as a loophole for TPS to avoid having to go to the Board of Education for approval. Some problematic expenditures were handled as direct payments. For instance, the foundation paid for the service of a consultant after the district realized it had failed to encumber funds as the law requires. Additionally, direct pay was used to distribute bonus payments to TPS employees for moving, retention, and supplemental income. These payments totaling $504,000 were not processed through district payroll, nor were they included in the employees' contracts. Oklahoma law requires that all compensation for school employees be clearly defined in their contracts to ensure transparency. The former chief financial officer, Jorge Robles, denied any knowledge of these bonuses, even though he had received a $25,000 bonus when he joined the district. 3 administrators also signed a bonus retention agreement confirming that the checks were linked to their terms of employment, but not included in their contracts. Of these bonus recipients, at least 65% did not stay with the district for more than 5 years. 16 of the bonus checks, or 2/3, totaling $221,000, were distributed to the alumni of the Broad Center at Yale School of Management in Connecticut. Only one of these Broad alumni remains with the district today. One of TPS's greatest challenges under Superintendent Gist was teacher retention, a problem exacerbated by a statewide teacher shortage. The Tulsa Teacher Corps, or the Teacher Corps, was a new teacher recruitment and training program tied to GIST 5-year strategic plan Destination Excellence. The Teacher Corps proposed a new path to teacher certification. The first group of trainees began a 6-week training program in the summer of 2018. Training included 5 to 10 hours a week of practice teaching in summer school classrooms. Participants in the Teacher Corps were expected to fill full-time teaching positions by the end of summer. They continued to attend training sessions throughout the year while teaching under temporary, emergency certificates, and pursuing full certification. Eventually, in January of 2020, the Oklahoma legislature approved this alternative certification program. However, for 2 years, the Teacher Corps operated without proper authorization. Some participants taught summer school without certifications, some without required OSBI background checks, and most without district contracts. In other words, many did not meet any of the basic requirements for classroom instruction. The board was not involved in paying these uncertified teachers for 3 out of the 4 years of the program's operation. Rather, TPS utilized vendors to pay the new teachers' summer stipends. Initially, the New Teacher Project, which ran the Teacher Corps trainings, paid for the Corps members' stipends. The vendor was then reimbursed by the foundation via direct pay. This allowed district leaders to keep board members in the dark about payments to program participants. In fact, one TPS employee celebrated the fact that they would not need to seek board approval for the Teacher Corps stipends. In 2019, the New Teacher Project elected to not cover the stipends, so the district paid the recruits as vendors directly. TPS also overpaid the trainees $35,000 that summer. In 2020 and 2021, Snickelbox facilitated the stipends, making upfront payments and being reimbursed by the foundation. Many of this vendor's invoices were false and are linked to the Tulsa Teacher Corps. Given the nature of these transactions, the Corps program became a vehicle for Devin Fletcher's largest misappropriations. Community partners are nonprofit organizations that provide supplemental services for TPS students. Members of these organizations interacted with students from at least 10 school sites. And altogether, TPS spent more than $37 million for community partner initiatives. One community partner, Growing Together, received $1.2 million between school year 2020 and school year 2023. Growing Together did not itemize their invoices. Instead, invoices were based on budgeted cost rather than actual cost. And when we asked for documentation of the services delivered, Deputy Superintendent Paula Shannon replied that TPS did not have access to the rich sets of reports and data generated by Growing Together and its partner organization, Communities in Schools, or CIS Mid-America. In some cases, they handed out direct aid, including food, utility payments, and even cash to families. In other words, TPS provided state and federal funds to Growing Together and CIS and allowed them to turn around and pay certain families directly. TPS could not provide evidence that its administrators, principals, or other staff provided oversight of these distributions. nor could TPS provide evidence of the criteria utilized to determine eligibility for the cash distributions. Growing Together received more than $108,000 for services that was not part of their contract. Specifically, Growing Together partnered with Tulsa Community Development to conduct district outreach among the Latino families. These outreach services were billed at a rate that varied from $20 to more than $106 per hour. Training, technology, and administrative fees were also attached to these invoices, though there was no supporting documentation to justify those expenditures. More than $42,000 or 40% of the amount billed for student outreach went to administrative fees. Another community partner was the Opportunity Project. This organization was created to serve as a liaison between TPS and outside entities like the Girl Scouts or the YMCA. From school year 2020 to school year 2023, TPS paid the Opportunity Project more than $6 million. The Wallace Foundation provided another $2 million, and then the foundation paid $65,000. The Opportunity Project did not contract with any other school districts. It was completely funded by the work it did on behalf of TPS, and taxpayer dollars were the primary source of the revenue for the organization. The Opportunity Project's administrative fees accounted for more than 30% of what the organization received. Deputy CFO Jill Hendricks admitted that the organization's invoices from March to May of 2022 had been paid without any review. She asked a staffer to examine and approve the spring invoices in July of that year, months after they had been billed. Hendricks also told the Opportunity Project that TPS did not require the submission of supporting documentation. Opportunity Project's invoices were vague and allowed the nonprofit to overbill TPS by more than $96,000. One of the Opportunity Project's partnered vendors operated an after-school bike club. In school year 2022, the company donated $30,000 to fund stipends for teachers chaperoning the program. The vendor then billed the Opportunity Project for nearly half of their donation. The Opportunity Project then billed this amount to TPS. Since the district did not ask for any documentation to support the invoices, staff did not realize that they were paying back money supposedly donated to TPS. Ultimately, TPS submitted the Opportunity Project expenditures to the State Department of Education for reimbursement through the federal ESSER program, a federal COVID relief program. TPS received a total of $83 million in ESSER funding for school year 2020 to school year 2023. We found that TPS did utilize the federal funds in compliance with the stated purposes of the grants. However, the district's systemic lack of internal controls brought some of the federal grant money into question. TPS was improperly reimbursed $110,801 in ESSER funds by the State Department of Education for costs associated with the Opportunity Project. The invoices TPS submitted for reimbursement through ESSER did not detail the services rendered, resulting in questioned costs totaling $4.9 million. Now, beyond the purchasing issues that we've covered in length, my team found additional compliance issues with some district vendors. Board policies 4490 and 4409-2 restrict TPS employees from accepting or participating in travel paid for or provided by district vendors. We discovered that TPS, after purchasing $32.4 million of computer equipment from a vendor, received training credits of $227,020. These training credits were paid directly to TPS employees by the vendors for travel and related expenses. This appears to be a direct violation of TPS district policies. In addition, of the $227,000, $165,977 remains unaccounted for. The topic of vendor payable brings us to another issue at TPS, conflicts of interest. Former board member Hania Rivera-Wester, then Managing Director of Communities and Schools of Mid-America, voted to approve a $390,000 contract for Growing Together, which was partnered with her employer, CIS. Rivera Wester failed to disclose that her husband was the founder and executive director of Growing Together. This was a violation of Board Policy 1102. Another Board Policy, 4409, forbids a district employee from holding outside business interests that may interfere with their loyalty to TPS. Advanced approval for any outside employment is a district requirement. 2 district employees, both executive administrators, operated businesses outside of their TPS employment. Assistant Superintendent Paula Shannon registered a business, Whole Leader Lab LLC, toward the end of 2022. There's no evidence that she obtained the required approval from the district legal counsel. Furthermore, her website reflected an endorsement by a TPS vendor, bringing into question Shannon's impartiality. We discovered that TPS Executive Director of Bond and Energy Management owned an architectural consulting business during the last 10 years of his employment at the district. He was conducting personal business with his TPS email account, and communications suggest that he was using district time, office space, and electronic resources for his own personal profit. We also found that this company conducted business with a school vendor, an engineering firm. From 2015 to 2024, the engineering firm received more than $8.4 million from the district, $1.6 million of which was reimbursed to the district through federal ESSER funds. The bond director was one of 3 people tasked with awarding construction bids, including those granted to this engineering firm. In fact, as a committee member, the director helped rank the firm's bid that was ultimately awarded to them by the district. He also managed the budgets for the district's bond projects. The extent of the bond director's personal business with the firm is unknown, but in 2019 he received $319,024 from the engineering firm, and this was higher than his TPS salary, which was approximately $120,000. Furthermore, the bond director, the largest architectural projects worked on in recent years were all at TPS locations. These actions are a violation of district policy and may also constitute a violation of state law. It is our understanding that the bond director resigned last week after we shared our summary of findings with TPS, and this issue has been reported to the proper authorities. Public schools are government schools, and transparency is a key element of good government. TPS failed to maintain control over records. The district relied on third-party applications like Slack, Trello, and Google Docs, which could be potential violations of the Open Records Act. In some cases, the district lost access to its own records. When our investigator requested access to staff communications sent through Slack, TPS had to request copies from Slack. The requested messages have never been produced or delivered to us to date. To give you an idea of the volume of records inaccessible to TPS, Jill Hendricks, TPS CFO, instructed her team to use Slack for all internal communications. Slack was commonly used by a core group of decision makers at TPS. These administrators, who referred to themselves as the super team, communicated via their Slack channel. This is an image of Devin Fletcher's Slack profile indicating notifications from Superintendent Team TPS. We also found documents on the Google Drive identified as confidential and labeled as not intended for public distribution. One of these documents discussed $14 million in planned expenditures. We recommend a thorough review of TPS's record-keeping practices to ensure that no financial documents are mislabeled confidential. Obtaining access to records in a timely manner was also a major challenge for our auditors. Because the documents were not readily available, TPS emails became a necessary element of our investigation, helping us track vendor relationships and payments. Whenever we requested emails, they were withheld until they had been thoroughly reviewed and heavily redacted. There are also large gaps within email communications we received for key administrators, and these gaps are linked to the summer and fall of 2021. The timing is significant because, according to TPS, district leaders began planning for Fletcher's departure in December of 2021. Our investigation also revealed issues regarding the Oklahoma teachers' retirement system. For years, TPS failed to make required contributions on behalf of eligible employees into the retirement system. While the district's outstanding liability has not been fully determined, TPS owes at least $1.2 million. And per the retirement system, there is a large pending liability for TPS that will exceed the $1.2 million. Now to DEI expenditures. For school year 2023, the State Department of Education required all school districts to submit a report of DEI-related purchases. We found that TPS underreported the amount paid for DEI-related services and consultants by at least $1.7 million. However, since invoices and any other supporting documentation were vague, the full amount expended for DEI in 2023 could not be determined. For the 8 years of expenditures our audit covered, we discovered that TPS hired at least 69 consultants, spending more than $35 million to research, plan, recruit, train, and coach staff at the district as the district implemented its 5-year plan, Destination Excellence. Destination Excellence was built on 5 key values, and equity was the leading core value and the priority. In 2021, Superintendent Gist said, "We deliberately put equity first. It is our primary core value and the foundation of all of our decisions." Yet in school year 2023, TPS failed to report expenditures for several of these DEI-related vendors. Turnaround for Children received $40,000 in 2023. The New Teacher Project, which led the Teacher Corps program, received $123,000 that year. Growing Together was paid more than $526,000 in 2023. And CT3 EduService made over $1 million in 2023 alone. These expenses were not reported to the State Department of Education. We also noted during our investigation that TPS worked with an organization called Impact Tulsa as a community partner to conduct significant data work in the development of a Child Equity Index. This index was designed to assist the district with allocating resources to targeted schools based on a number of factors. Among the factors utilized in the index's development were race, ethnicity, gender, neighborhood crime statistics, student mobility, and other factors. Impact Tulsa was paid through the foundation for their assistance with the index. We don't know exactly how or when the index was utilized by TPS, but we know that the concept was presented to administrators at TPS in 2018 and that Impact Tulsa, quote, served all students in Tulsa County, helping them understand their data and strategically think through population-level interventions. Now, given that the state of Oklahoma already has a complex funding formula for distributing educational resources, this warrants further investigation and discussion. Going back to Governor Stitt's original request, one of his concerns centered around a possible violation of House Bill 1775, which bans certain elements of critical race theory, or CRT. The law pertains to what can be taught in classrooms, but the Oklahoma Administrative Code extends those restrictions to the schools and their activities, and to their activities more broadly. The administrative rules prohibit schools from adopting DEI plans that incorporate the concepts of CRT. Now, my focus was a financial review, and it was not to comment on TPS's teaching philosophy or ideological principles. Our investigation did not look into curriculum or disciplinary methods. My job was to analyze district expenditures and to look for potential violations of state law related to spending. When House Bill 1775 became effective, the district represented that they did not need to change their lessons and/or approach in regards to CRT. Our investigators reviewed historical documents, training materials, contracts, presentations, invoices, and other records provided by TPS. The district's failure to keep adequate documentation to support their expenditures affected our ability to determine the exact services provided, courses offered, or presentations made. However, there was evidence that the district did incur some expenditures with vendors for prohibited concepts after House Bill 1775 became effective. And no auditor wants to find evidence like this. It doesn't serve anyone's interest when a public school fails to act with financial responsibility, especially in the interest of wonderful teachers and students of that school district. Even though we uncovered substantial issues with internal controls and noncompliance with state law, the scope of our investigation was limited. We are still left with a number of unanswered questions. Why were there substantial gaps in communications and emails between administrators, including between Gist and Fletcher, that were never provided to our investigators? Was TPS correctly coding the numerous consultants and vendors in the Oklahoma cost accounting system as administrative cost? We're going to recommend to the State Department of Education that they look into that matter. And finally, is TPS still involved with vendors, training practices, and concepts intertwined with elements of CRT that potentially violate House Bill 1775 and the administrative rules? Because this was not the primary focus of the audit, we were unable to make that determination. Now, all of these questions merit further investigation by the appropriate agencies, but there's reason for hope. Our findings identified key areas where reform is necessary and can be implemented immediately. We are hopeful that the current administration has already taken some steps to address the issues that we've talked about here today. The administration needs to actively work to improve internal controls and strengthen oversight and transparency. These efforts would demonstrate a genuine commitment to resolve the systemic issues that we uncovered at TPS. For my part, I extend an open hand to Superintendent Dr. Johnson and the Tulsa board members. I'm committed to helping them reestablish sound financial practices that will protect our students and the taxpayers. Moving forward, there is no reason why TPS cannot rebuild and foster a culture of responsibility and trust, and it's my sincere hope that they can begin to do so immediately. Thank you all for coming today. Again, my apologies for being a little late. At this time, I'd be happy to take questions.
What umbrella, let's say, is the most glaring part of this?
The most glaring part is the lack of financial accountability. We spend a lot of money on education. I think in the budget it's around 50%, give or take a little, and legislators want to continue to fund our public education. I think it's important that school districts are transparent and that they put in sound financial practices to assure the taxpayers that they're taking care of the money.
Are you recommending any charges be pressed or look to the AG's office?
I am just a reporting agency. We are turning our findings. We've already turned a couple over to the Attorney General's office, but I think there are some issues in here that the Attorney General's office should look into. We'll be having those discussions.
During this investigation, did you all ever try and reach out to former Superintendent Dr. Deborah Gibbs? Was she helpful in any kind of way?
I don't think any of these issues would have risen to the level of reaching out to Superintendent Gist. I think that the Chief Financial Officer is the one who would be responsible for answering all of these financial issues.
Has this led to any more investigations that you guys are concerned about?
Can you be more specific as far as investigations at TPS?
Yeah, at TPS.
I've listed my questions that other authorities need to continue with and go forward, but we're done. We're finished.
When it comes to the issues of transparency here and those applications you mentioned that the district was using that made gathering information a little bit more difficult, do you know if they're still using those tools? Have they kind of steered away from using them at this point?
Our scope of the audit ended with school year 23, and you would have to direct that question to them.
Last press conference, we talked about that state statute, about the discussion between the auditor and the school board and the superintendent. Did that happen, and if so, what came out?
Well, there was a lot of confusion regarding that last press conference. It should be noted that almost every one of these findings, those issues had been discussed with Superintendent Johnson and the board's legal counsel probably 9 months ago. There were two surprises. One of them was the director of bond that issue that we found there. But all of these issues had been communicated, which is probably why Superintendent Johnson has tried to let people know that she's cleaned things up. We've communicated that to her.
For clarification, were the critical race theory issues, were those communicated 9 months ago as well?
I would have to check. I know that we had a lot of questions, and keep in mind that whenever we don't do this audit in a bubble, we are constantly communicating with individuals at TPS asking for more information. So it certainly couldn't have come as a surprise.
Do you have concerns outside of just TPS's relationship with their foundation and other school districts and their relationships with their foundations?
I think that having a foundation to supplement public education is a wonderful thing, and I would never want to see that relationship harmed. Again, we just need to see what did we spend money on and make sure that we're doing things in a transparent manner. You know, not only at Tulsa Public School District, but also in my audits that I put out recently at the state level. We're not seeing true competitive bidding that taxpayers once thought they were getting, and we've got to get back to those sound financial practices. But back to the rest of your question about the relationships. You know, if we had an RFP process in place, there would be no question about these relationships because we would know that we were getting the best price and the best product, and it would be transparent about what services or goods were being delivered to the school. So I would think, I'm not going to hammer on relationships. Those can be a great thing. We just need to know what we're paying for and that we're paying a fair price.
Whenever you were presenting on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, I believe there was mention of 8 years back this amount was spent. Obviously, the administrative rules dealing with DEI are, I believe, only a year old.
That is correct.
HB 1775 was only passed in 2021. Is TPS getting retroactively dinged for things that were not illegal at the time?
No, and if you read the audit reports, that's a really good question. If you read the audit report, the vague contracts were the main issue that we went back 8 years to look at because with no clear defined deliverables, we had to look to see, was this part of Fletcher's scheme as well? Were there any true issues here? But that's something that we noticed. You know, it's a matter of consulting contracts and payments with no idea what the district's getting.
You mentioned the $83 million from ESSER. Got a couple questions on that. First of all, did you say that was in just school year 2023 they received that funding?
Let me go back and look at that. I don't believe it was just one school year, no.
Okay.
I think that was multiple school years. They received $83 million in ESSER funding for school year 2020 through 2023.
Okay. And
So 4 years.
that seems like a big number, $20 million a year. Have you looked at any other cases that are comparable or know of any other?
Well, what's your question about that $83 million?
Is that a normal number for school districts to get from this agency? Is that comparable to others around the country, or is that
Well,
pretty high?
I think that's pretty comparable because it was divided up, I believe, according to population. But one thing I want to mention with this, I don't want you to run away with that number of $4.9 million in question cost. Question cost can mean many things, and when we talk about question cost in relation to a federal grant, in this instance, it means there was not supporting documentation to verify it at the time of the expenditure.
Thank you. I wanted to touch on really the lack of documentation that you guys ran into kind of like throughout this process. Do you feel like that could be something, in your opinion, that might lead to additional audits in the future if something comes out that's significant or another skeleton in the closet comes through?
Well, I want to be clear about something. We're finished with our audit of TPS, and I wish them well. You know, we can't audit 100% of everything. Could there be more issues? Certainly. I think that we're giving Dr. Johnson the playbook on how to go forward and be transparent and accountable. And if that's something the district wants to go back and look at, I would encourage them to do so. But at this point, we needed to wrap it up and get on to the numerous other audits that we have in queue.
Auditor, could I ask just about the past 2 weeks? You plan to release this audit on February 11th. There was state law that caused a 14-day delay. I think the purpose of that law was so that the district could have discussions with your office about the findings. So have those
We have had discussions and we have emails where they've asked us for information and we've provided them information and we've asked them for some information. I'm not sure they could give us everything we ask for. I would have to double check that. This would probably be a good time to let you know that because we know you all are going to want work papers and documentation, I have a wonderful IT department that has made a link on our website. I'm not sure exactly where it is. We can direct you to that. But when you click on that link, you're going to be able to go out here and get this PowerPoint, all these images. You'll be able to see the audit report. And then as people start to ask for documents, we will start to put those in that link as well so you can see everything that we saw.
Has TPS received the full report yet?
No. No one ever receives the full report before it's published. That is standard operating practice for the 28 years that I've been in the auditor's office.
Whenever you were looking into DEI and CRP for the last two, I guess, questions that Governor Stitt had, which you based your audit on, how did you all decide what was appropriate or not for a school to, I guess, spend money on? How did you all decide what would be defined as CRT or DEI, especially Tulsa's school that's majority minority? A lot of the money, I assume, would be spent on addressing academic achievement gaps, which are to some extent racial.
And I suspected that I would get this question, so I want to point you to, let me see if I have this. We have a page in the audit report that limits how narrow that scope was that we looked at. I can tell you off the top of my head what we looked at were consulting contracts focused on equity. And so we made the statement, we can't determine how much of this consulting contract was paid for this. We can only tell you $35 million worth of contracts were let that involved equity, which is a crucial element of that.
Okay.
I think whenever you read the report, it clarifies that scope very clearly. Because again, we're not out here looking at what teachers are teaching in the classroom. We're not out here looking at curriculum. We looked at expenditures only and the contracts and the documentation they had available for those contracts.
Okay, and could you explain to me how y'all came to that definition? I guess expenditures on equity whenever there are obvious achievement gaps in a school district, I don't know if those would necessarily be classified as DEI in the way that I understand it.
Well, I think that what you're getting into is not the direction this audit went. And again, I'm going to ask you to wait and read the audit report and those clear definitions that we put out there. Because this was not an audit to determine what was taught in the classrooms or any kind of curriculum. This is specifically related to contracts. We noted consulting contracts for equity purposes that were let with little description. And I think whenever you see the wording in the audit report, you're going to see how much we drew back from that and didn't make conclusions on that.
Okay. And again, you mentioned that there are going to be specific definitions in the report. Can you tell me how y'all got those definitions?
Everything that we do is through the lens of the law and the administrative rules that are on the book. So I would suggest you go there and read that, and I think we referenced those in the audit report.
Okay.
Can I ask, I think in your previous press conference you mentioned there was sort of the past administration at TPS was not necessarily the most helpful to you all. Didn't know if you wanted to reiterate that at all, or what it was like dealing with them, and if you've had as much contact with the current administration, and if you've noticed a change in terms of how cooperative they've been.
You know, Nuria, that's a great question. We did feel like there was some resistance there, but I think I'd like to leave this press conference on a high note and offer my extension of help getting things back on track, and that's where we should all be focused at this point. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all very much for coming again. My apologies for starting late.